Appeals in New York, one of the nation's foremost jurists, and a kind, humble, compassionate human being who was deeply admired by everyone who knew him. The son of immigrants, his father was a refugee from Nazi Germany. Robert Katzman was an amazing intellect, attending our nation's top schools. He went on to work for his professor and eventual mentor, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, whetting his chops working on the confirmation of Ruth Bader Ginsburg to the Supreme Court. For the rest of his life, he was maybe the most important writer on the topic of legislative-judicial relations. Later in his life, even when he had obtained one of the highest judgeships in the country, Judge Katzman never lost his passion for helping those who were just starting their careers. He taught at NYU and Georgetown and ran an acclaimed civic education course even while he was chief judge on the Court of Appeals. He also lectured widely for the cause of proper legal representation for the poor, especially the immigrant poor. It just so happens that yesterday morning, I was able to introduce a nominee to the Second Circuit, Judge Katzman's circuit, who dedicated her career to providing top-notch legal counsel to those who couldn't afford it, Miss Eunice Lee, a former federal defender. It's a fitting reminder that Judge Katzman's legacy lives on through the principles he advanced. We send our deepest condolences to his wife, his brothers and sister, and the innumerable number of students and colleagues who Judge Katzman inspired over the course of his life. Now on the subject of our business here on the floor. The Senate has had a very productive week. We began the week by passing landmark bipartisan legislation to supercharge American innovation and lay the groundwork for another century of American leadership on the world stage. It passed with nearly 70 votes, an overwhelming and rare display of bipartisan support. As I mentioned yesterday, we're going to work with Speaker Pelosi and the relevant committee chairs in the House to move this bill forward as quickly as possible. It's vital to our nation's future that the House and Senate must come together to send President Biden a bill that he can sign into law. The Senate also confirmed the first judicial appointments of President Biden's tenure, 2 district court judges, and we will confirm a third today, the first Muslim American to serve as an Article III judge in our history. On Monday, the Senate will confirm President Biden's First Circuit Court nominee, the amazing Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. And next week, this chamber will take up additional highly qualified nominees to the executive branch, including Lina Khan for the Federal Trade Commission and several others. The Senate Democratic majority will move swiftly to perform our constitutional duty to advise and consent on the president's nominees. On another matter, ransomware. Over the past few months, there have been a number of high-profile cyber attacks against the U.S. government, American businesses, and critical infrastructure. From the CyberWinds attack last year to a ransomware attack on the city of Baltimore and the Colonial Pipeline, cybercrime is a real and growing threat. Just last week, the MTA, our vast subway system in New York, was victim of an attack. While the Attorney General has announced intensified effort to combat this scourge of ransomware attacks, we in Congress have a responsibility to conduct oversight and determine whether our government needs an additional authority and resource to take the fight to cyber criminals and foreign intelligence services. Congress must ensure that federal agencies, like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, have the necessary resources to take on this growing threat and support state and local governments under assault. So earlier this week, I called for Congress to increase CISA's budget by $500 million to fight this growing threat. And today, I am asking Chairman Peters, Gary Peters, of our Homeland Security Committee, and the other relevant committee chairs to begin a government-wide review of these attacks and determine what legislation may be needed to counter the threat of cybercrime and bring the fight to the cyber criminals. One final matter. I want my colleagues to be aware of the number 29%. That's the percentage of Republican voters who believe that President Trump will, quote, be reinstated, unquote, as president later this summer. 29%, almost a third of Republican voters believe he'll be reinstated as president. According to that recent poll by Morning Consult, nearly a third of Republican voters believe Donald Trump will be reinstated. Of course, the idea of reinstatement comes from disgraced former President Trump himself and is nothing more than the deluded ramblings of a defeated politician. But it's a glaring warning that the big lie has created fertile ground for all sorts of insane conspiracy. It's a depressing fact of our times that there's an audience out there who will literally believe anything the former president says, no matter how unrealistic or untrue. They believe him when he just abjectly lies. The blame here, however, does not rest only with the former president. The blame falls heavily on Washington Republicans and the political right, who have not done enough to stand up to the big lie. After making a few brave noises in the wake of January 6th, Republican leadership here in Washington now seems to have traded political coverage and truth for appeasement. The Republican minority leader in the House called Donald Trump morally responsible for the attack on January 6th. He empowered his deputies to take part in painstaking negotiations to establish an independent commission to study those events, and then promptly voted against it. He convened his entire conference to deliver a pink slip to the one member of his leadership team who dared repeat the truth that President Biden is the president. Here in the Senate, the Republican leader gave a strong speech on January 6th and was willing to hold Donald Trump responsible for what happened that day. Several months later, however, the Republican leader whipped his members into a partisan filibuster of an independent commission, which he called a purely political exercise. The Republican Party is now wrapped around the axle of the big lie. And a big reason why is that Republican leaders are unwilling to move on from Trumpism. We are watching the results play out in state after state where Republican legislatures have swallowed the big lie whole and are rapidly constricting the right to vote and fumbling through old ballots for traces of bamboo. The truth is, the big lie has consequences. It erodes our trust in elections, faith in our democracy, and it's gnawing away at the very right to vote in America. After 4 long years during which the Republican Party foolishly tried to ride the tiger of Donald Trump, it seems as though many of them wound up inside. I yield the floor. And note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.